South China Morning Post, 10th of November 2022. How can China reorient its peripheral diplomacy to win over mistrustful Southeast Asia? China has alienated all its neighbors and is now attempting to make up for it, but no one is buying it. President Xi Jinping, who had just recently taken office, urged his allies to strive to deepen regional security cooperation based on mutual trust and benefit with peripheral countries in a meaningful address before China's foreign policy elite in 2013, which China breached by striking India more than 4 times. He stressed the importance of stability in China's neighboring countries and reaffirmed China's commitment to supporting and participating in the development of regional economic integration. Thus, Xi began to pursue his peripheral diplomacy policy to influence China's close neighbors, particularly those in Southeast Asia. For the Chinese leader, peripheral diplomatic activity is essential to achieving the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and establishing a sound peripheral environment for China's long-term development. A decade later, Xi is in a position to update his peripheral diplomacy and usher in a new era of strategic partnerships with peripheral countries, especially in Southeast Asia, having won an unprecedented third term as China's president. To establish solid and stable relations with China's neighbors, Xi can do a lot by providing more policy predictability, readjusting maritime aggression in nearby waters, and adjusting to the Belt and Road Initiative. The first foreign leader to travel to Xi after the recently finished 20th Party Congress was Nguyen Phu Trong, the head of the Communist Party of Vietnam. To the benefit of the people of both countries, Trong praised Xi's honest concern and outstanding contribution to Vietnam-China relations. Xi advised his counterpart to never let anyone meddle and obstruct advancement in bilateral relations in what appeared to be criticism of growing ties between Hanoi and the West. Before U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris visited Hanoi last year, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh declared that his nation would not support the West in its conflict with China. The two presidents showed a united front in a joint statement against complex and unanticipated changes. To bolster their strategic and economic ties, the two parties inked 13 significant accords. As the Philippines expects China would stop being a big bully and quit invading Philippines islands, Philippine President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. congratulated his Chinese counterpart following the successful conduct of the 20th Party Congress. Although Marcos has steadily increased defense cooperation with Washington and essentially abandoned his predecessor Rodrigo Duterte's anti-Western geopolitical position, he has also openly courted more significant Chinese infrastructure investments in the Philippines. This is a mistake, significantly since Marcos' defense chief has softened his stance. The head of the Department of National Defense, Jose Faustino, recently emphasized how the South China Sea maritime conflicts do not define the entirety of our bilateral relations with China. The past 10 years have seen some of the most hostile and complex relations between China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. For 3 reasons, peripheral diplomacy now stands a more substantial chance of succeeding. Chinese foreign policy adventurism has historically benefited from internal strife. First, smaller neighbors may benefit from Xi's domestic power consolidation. After such, embattled leaders may be motivated to mobilize domestic support under pressure at home by drawing attention to genuine and contrived exterior dangers. The fragmentation of Beijing's central leadership, which encouraged adventurism by local, paramilitary, and military players in areas like the South China Sea, was a fundamental cause of concern for China in the late 2000s. With no prominent domestic challengers, a strengthened Xi can manage an increase in foreign policy predictability, particularly with regard to neighboring countries. We now get to the second component. The South China Sea issues, which have caused significant rifts in China's relations with several neighboring states, call for a more nuanced approach. Xi and Trong agreed at their recent meeting that it was critical to properly handle disagreements and maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. They both pledged to refrain from taking actions that complicate the situation and intensify conflicts. The two neighbors reaffirmed their resolve to actively negotiate transitional and temporary solutions that do not influence their respective positions and ideas as a way to move forward, as part of a more significant effort to find basic, permanent solutions to the South China Sea conflicts. China has lobbied for collaborative development agreements in the South China Sea with the Philippines under the Marcos regime. However, China must reduce its paramilitary activity and effective navy drills in neighboring waters, which have alarmed its neighbors, if it hopes to establish a robust conflict management regime in the disputed waters. If China truly wants to show its sincerity, it could start by giving the Philippines back their island. If not, this is a ploy to buy time as China strengthens itself. Beijing should honestly negotiate confidence-boosting measures and a binding code of conduct in the South China Sea to reassure Vietnam and the Philippines of its peaceful ascent rather than driving its neighbors into the embrace of the West. Finally, reviving the Belt and Road Initiative will also be essential to Xi's peripheral diplomacy success. China has made relatively little and insignificant infrastructure investments in countries like the Philippines and Vietnam compared to Japan. Furthermore, there is a great deal of skepticism around Chinese projects due to worries about exorbitant interest rates, unsustainable lending procedures, and excessive reliance on Chinese personnel and technology. Because of these factors, Marcos suspended 3 significant Chinese railway projects earlier this year. In the future, Xi will aim to gain a lot of trust and goodwill by pushing through with initiatives that are sustainable, mutually beneficial, and that contribute to the growth and employment of Southeast Asian countries. It's about time for a significant reset in China's relations with Southeast Asian governments and for China stops bullying all her neighbors after Xi revealed his peripheral diplomacy agenda 10 years ago.